Hey, welcome back to another episode of Politics for the Culture. I'm your host, Senator Dwight Bullard. Again, hashtag peep the pin. The lapel pin's going to switch out. The color scheme's going to stay pretty standard, but you got to watch the pin. So peep the pin. This pin is, of course, one of my favorites, Black Boy Joy. That is kind of a standard that I hold myself to, that in all things that I do, whether it be work, pleasure, find joy in all of it, and making sure you do the same. It's also appropriate because today's guest is, again, friend of mine, hopefully new friend to the show, gentleman by the name of C. Isaiah Smalls. I call him Isaiah. Solid brother, good Morehouse man. I mean, he picked a interesting fraternity. No, shout out to the alphas that are out there in the world. But Isaiah's going to be joining us because we really want to talk about the hot summer of 2020, some of the aftermath and the looking into the future. As you remember, back in the summer of 2020, we were in the midst of a global pandemic. We unfortunately had to experience the 9 minutes of watching the murder of George Floyd. And then shortly thereafter, what some refer to as a racial reckoning, where you had a number of companies, entities, organizations talking about things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and making sure that there was a seat at the table for people who had not gotten those seats previously. And so when we think about even in journalism, the Miami Herald brings on this dynamic journalist by the name of Isaiah Smalls to kind of begin looking at the broader untold stories of Black people, especially in South Florida and Miami. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but I want to welcome Isaiah to Politics for the Culture. Welcome to the show, Isaiah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love the pin, by the way. It's great colors, too. So,
I did that for you. Not to mention, as a fellow person who experiences Black Boy Joy, I figured it'd be important to celebrate with you on the show. But thank you for recognizing the color scheme. Subtle, but I appreciate that, no doubt. As soon as they make a crimson and cream one, I'm switching this one out, though. Let's be clear. But in all seriousness, summer of 2020, a lot going on. Folks stuck inside. The world trying to figure out its next steps, and you're introduced to South Florida. Could you talk a little bit about that journey, what brought you into the space, and then really kind of how you've been navigating the space in the aftermath of the summer 2020?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So funny enough, I've actually, at the time of George Floyd's murder, I'd been living in South Florida for almost a year at that time. I moved down here summer 2019, actually, fresh from Columbia Journalism School, just ready to get my journalism career started, and so I was doing a lot of breaking news at first, right? And so after, George Floyd was killed and, you have this summer of protests, the Herald decided like, hey, we probably need somebody covering the Black community here, right? And initially it was pinned as a Black Lives reporter, specifically covering the city of Miami Gardens, which is, as you know, the largest primarily Black city here in the state of Florida. And so, I stepped into the role, but for me, it was never about covering just one city. Black Miami is very vast, right? And aside from the fact like the Black Lives reporter name was problematic in of itself, so I immediately said, hey, no, just call me the race and culture reporter. Like, I'm Black already. I'm going to tell Black stories. That's something that has always been a passion of mine. And so just to be able to do it here it's been a blessing, honestly. For me, it's about finding that history and, just unearthing it, time and time again, because, before I came down here, I spent time in New York, time in Atlanta. I'm originally from Delaware. And, the popular images that you see of Miami aren't usually of people who look like us, right? So I didn't necessarily think of Black people when I moved down here. And so it's been a pleasure to relearn so much stuff about, Black Miami, about Black South Florida in general. And it's really, I like to say that Miami is really a microcosm for the rest of the country because, what is it, 2040, 2050, when it's a majority minority nation, there's things that obviously need to happen for that to be a more just and equal society for all people to live in. So that's a little bit about me and my journey here. Of course, I went to the greatest college on earth, Morehouse. So that obviously influenced a lot of my politics, the way I view the world, And so for me, when I came down here, I was telling stories, Black stories to begin with, but it wasn't really in this capacity, right? So it's just been a pleasure to meet people like yourself and really just learn a lot more about this region.
Well, no, I definitely appreciate that. And I'm glad you touched on kind of your lived experience as someone who's spent time in Atlanta, spent time, Columbia sits just outside of Harlem. Those are kind of very specific, kind of like to the Black cultural experience when we think about it from especially from a United States perspective, right? What are some of the commonalities that you see in Miami, and then what are some of the distinct differences that you've experienced having bore witness to both of those spaces and now kind of living and working in Miami?
Yeah, so from a similarity standpoint, the one that stands out the most to me is, regardless of oppression, regardless of racism, regardless of any of these external forces out there, we're going to create community where we are, right? And so down here was Overtown. Obviously, that was a big one, the Harlem of the South, right? And so just to go back and learn so much about that history, like it's so rich, so powerful, so beautiful, and it's very much connected to the rest of the United States. And to that end, protest. I think that's also a big thing. Anytime there is oppression, racism, it's not like we're going to sit on our hands and be like, oh, this is happening to us, right? Like, and I think that's something that our history books kind of miss out on. The fact that at any point in this country's history, when there was anything unjust happening, we are on the front line saying, no, like this is wrong, and I think, like I said, the history books kind of missed that. And so, Miami in of itself has a very, very rich history of protest during the civil rights movement, even, after Trayvon Martin, it's something that has continued throughout the history. So those are the two big similarities, that stand out to me. And differences is, for me, the biggest difference that I noticed here was how people refer to themselves, right? Like this is a place where you usually say the country you're from first, right? A lot of people, for me, like when I was just from a writing standpoint, when I'm writing about Black people, I used to say Black American and African American interchangeably, right? And so after a while, I realized that I wasn't speaking to everybody. As soon as they saw African American, they're like, oh, they're not referring to me, because a lot of people down here, like if you're Jamaican, you're saying, oh, I'm Jamaican. If I'm Bahamian, you're saying, oh, I'm Bahamian. If I'm, Haitian, it's, oh, I'm Haitian, like before you even say Black, right? And so for me, I started writing more using Black, when I'm referring to everybody, because that to me is the thing that, we all share. Obviously our rich cultural heritage is important, right? Jamaicans are very different from Bahamians. Haitians, I'm not trying to group them all together. However, it's important, I think, when you have issues out in the world, for us to kind of have a common standpoint, I guess, or a common, belief that obviously racism is wrong, oppression is wrong, sexism, homophobia, all these things are wrong. And, in order to, I guess, speak to that collective group, that's the term I started using, Black. And so for me, like anytime someone introduces themselves to me, I literally just had one of these conversations with my roommate. They're like, how do you refer to yourself? I said, I'm Black, like Black American. I'm the descendant of slaves. The one thing I heard down here that like real Yankee, I'm a real Yankee, So that's something that has always, stuck out to me.
No doubt, no doubt. So you mentioned kind of the fact that you became this race and culture reporter for the Herald in the midst of the tumultuous summer of 2020. We start to see, like in that, of course, you have a lot of, some would qualify as performative acts, a lot of, Black Lives Matter murals popping up everywhere, or, folks wanting to do these very short-sighted immersive trainings very quickly. Like within the first 6 months, it was, we need to have a DEI discussion or bring in a DEI specialist to do a report on where we've been short-sighted. But of course, fast forward to where we are in 2023, we're starting to see many of those companies shrinking those departments or abandoning, all the recommendations that they've made. Would love kind of your thoughts on, it seems obvious, but why do you think this trend is happening? And is it just folks kind of being responsive to the challenges that we're facing here in Florida with, Ron DeSantis and others who are, calling all of that wokeism? Or is it really just folks being like, well, we did something, it was cute for 6 months to a year following George Floyd's murder, and now let's get back to business as usual? Kind of, do you see it as one or the other, or some nuanced thing in between that?
Yeah, I think it's really a combination of both. I think anytime you look at American history, anytime there's these moments of perceived steps towards equality, right? There's always the backlash, right? For example, once they freed the slaves, Jim Crow, So I think it's something that has been constantly repeated in American history, right? And so to answer your question more pointedly, I think it's really a combination of both. I think people are seeing what Ron DeSantis is doing, and they're like, well, I mean, if he's doing it, why can't we? And obviously that's wrong, but that's what they're doing anyway. And then, on the flip side of that, you mentioned, is it just a year, 6 months, it's cool, let's just pull out? I think it's a little bit of that as well, because, the only way to keep someone's feet to the fire is constant pressure, right? And I think after, a year, 2 years, all these, performative actions, the pressure kind of eased up a little bit, unfortunately. And so don't get me wrong, anytime a company does something racist, people are very quick to get on the internet and bash them and do XYZ until they get that, carbon copy press release saying, oh, we didn't mean to do this, it was actually this, it was actually, but I think largely speaking, I think the pressure is off of them a little bit, right? And so I think it's up to people like us to really keep that pressure on them and, push for those DEI, offices to be expanded, not, closed down, because I think that's the only way these small instances of, XYZ company doing something racist, like, I think that's the only way we can weed that out. If these companies start to really understand how entrenched racism is in our society, that's the only way they can, get away with, or that's the only way that things will really change.
Definitely an important perspective, and kind of thinking in that same vein, when we think about, especially as a student of history, when I think about the role of Black journalists who have been, provocative, have been intentional in their reporting around really kind of pushing the culture forward, whether it is the photography of Gordon Parks, whether it is the contributions of journalistic writers like James Baldwin and others. There's an importance there. There's also a legacy there. My question in the midst of that is, and not to, be self-aggrandizing, but really kind of like thinking about your place as a Black reporter in the history of the culture, where do you want to see your writing go? Where do you want to see how people perceive you as a journalist 20, 30, 50 years from now?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, look, like anytime you get compared to a Baldwin or anything like that, like that's always the goal, I guess, so to speak, right? But for me, it's really about the community that I've kind of formed, right? I think it's more so about my thing here, because I'm not from here. I've always wanted the community to speak through me, right? And if I'm wrong, I want to be told, yo, you messed up. If I'm right, I want to be told, not really, told like good job. Really, that's not really what I do it for. But I think it's really, for me, my legacy. I wanted to be, he was a solid dude. He was someone that spoke for us, and was willing to take criticism. I think that's ultimately what I want to be remembered as, because anytime you mention those people, like I start to get my shoulders tense up a little bit, just because like those are Baldwin, A Fire Next Time is probably my favorite book ever, and that really changed the way that I think about writing, the way I think about the Black person in this role, right? And so for me, I've always wanted to speak truth to power. I think a lot of times what people don't realize about journalism is it's definitely biased. Like there's definitely biases all throughout journalism, even though our objective is to be objective, so to speak. It's very subjective, right? And I think the only way you get to this level of objectivity that is so vaunted and in journalism, like, is through a bunch of different voices who are diverse, who can speak to this issue, right? So it's not just a uniform, take, because honestly, like this theory of objectivity that is so valued here in journalism. I mean, if you think about it, it was really created by old white men who thought they were the only people that could be impartial, right? And so when you start thinking about that, and personally, like at Columbia, I had to walk by a statue of Thomas Jefferson every single day to class. It's literally right in front of the journalism building, right? And for me, it's like, okay, that is a subjective decision to put that there, right? And so when people walk through these halls, it's sometimes, difficult not to feel like you don't belong, And I think for me, I realized very early on that, one, I did belong. Two, I'm better than a lot of these people. Like I hate to sound like that, but like that's really what I had to, psych myself up to do, because it's Columbia Journalism School, like the only Ivy League journalism institution, postgraduate journalism institution, in the country. So it would be very easy for me to kind of just hide my light, but I think I had to let it shine. I hate to be cliche, but yeah, I think that was a very long answer to your question.
No, I appreciate that. And appreciate you being on the show. We couldn't conclude an episode of Politics for the Culture without delving a little into the culture. And of course, as somebody born in or raised in Delaware, which is outside of, the great city in which I was born in, Philadelphia, went to undergrad in Atlanta and then graduate school in New York. Going to have to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
I need you to recommend a hip hop artist from each region that you would let our viewers know is somebody they should check out. So going Delaware, Philly first, Atlanta, and then New York. Give me somebody who folks need to be checking out. Okay. Good, bad, or indifferent, old school, new school. Leave it up to you.
Wow. This is a big one, because the Delaware Philly one is interesting, because I'm trying to think of, I mean, obviously like Meek Mill comes to mind, right? Like he is the one that is the, that's the guy, Dreams and Nightmares is like it's my anthem, really. So that's obvious one for me. From Atlanta, I think that's when it gets a little bit more difficult, right? Because Atlanta's like music scene is really killing it right now, right? And so I mean, I feel like everyone kind of knows Lil Baby, so I want to kind of avoid that one. But I'd say Deontay Hitchcock. That is someone that's from Atlanta that put out a great album recently that centered on like a love story, right? And I think what he did there between incorporating the R&B classic R&B samples, like there's Jodeci, Tevin Campbell's sampled. So those he really killed that in his previous project. I'm a big fan of too. Also Kenny Mason from Atlanta too. Those are two guys I think really really stand out to me. And from New York, I'm gonna actually give it to the homie Joe West. I'm gonna have to tag him in this when I get the footage from this. But the homie Joe West, definitely, because he is someone that I have randomly met just on the streets of Harlem as a journalist, right? And he had a raw talent there that just immediately stood out to me because I don't really, the people. I think it's very easy nowadays in hip hop to just throw some auto tune on it and just, all right, let's just see what happens there. But he's someone that kind of reminded me of the classic boom bap New York style, and he just got a record deal to just sign to Atlantic Records. So that's somebody that I think people should look out for. For one, I actually just connected with him again and down here a couple weeks, about a month ago. We just ran into each other again down here, so it was kind of amazing. Like, yo, I'm so proud of you. Well, I'm so proud of you. Moment. So I'm gonna say the homie Joe West is definitely somebody people should look out for. And then, like I said, the Delaware Philly is just. I'm gonna say Meek Mill because I'm sure Meek Mill has some fire dropping soon. So, yeah, those are the big ones for me.
Absolutely, no doubt. I appreciate you showing love to Philly's own Meek Mill. Sure. Isaiah, I can't thank you enough for joining me on this episode of Politics for the Culture. Definitely, I'm sure as you're writing and being a journalist throughout, there's going to be more than ample opportunity to bring you back to talk about all that's going on out there in the world. But I want to thank you again for joining me on Politics for the Culture, where we're doing politics for us and by us. Make sure to check out the episode. And again, peep the pen, Black Boy Joy. Thank you for being on this episode.
Appreciate it.